Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at an article from the front page of the Delhi edition. This article refers to an escalation of the border dispute between India and Nepal. On the 10th of May, we had discussed the border dispute between the two countries in detail along with its background, and we had understood that India and Nepal have a standing border dispute at two locations known as Kalapani and Susta. This is not a dispute that has emerged today, but it has been a long-standing dispute between the two countries, and it traces back its origin to the Treaty of Sugauli, which was signed in 1816 between the then British government and the Kingdom of Nepal. Hence, this border dispute is referred to as one of the remnants of the many partition blunders that were committed by the colonial government across South Asia. See, the British colonial government has left behind a number of partition blunders across South Asia, across Middle East and as well as Africa, and this has contributed to the emergence of border disputes between a number of neighboring countries, and they continue to be a source of conflict and tensions to this day. So the Indo-Nepal border dispute is also the result of one such colonial blunder, and it traces back its origin to the Treaty of Sugauli of 1816. Since we have covered this background in detail on the 10th of May, let us talk about the current escalation and analyze the reasons behind it. See, India and Nepal happen to be very close neighbors, and in general, they have shared a very cordial relationship over the years. Nepal has a lot of dependency on India because it is a landlocked country, and in order to support its small economy, both the countries have established a system of open borders, and India has allowed Nepali citizens to study and take up employment opportunities in India. So both the countries share a long history of civilizational and cultural relations, and they are bound by the unique geography of the Himalayan region. Over the years, India has played a key role in Nepal's economic development by investing in key projects, by creating the required infrastructure, by providing port access to the landlocked country of Nepal, by providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief and cooperation in the field of disaster management whenever Nepal has been hit by natural disasters such as earthquakes. And India has also played a key role in ensuring political stability and peace in Nepal. Until a few years ago, Nepal was a theological monarchy. Then, Nepal witnessed a brutal civil war between Maoists and the Nepali government. And finally, the civil war was brought to an end and Nepal transitioned into a full-fledged democracy. And India has always been playing a key role in all these political developments. But this deep involvement of India in the internal affairs of Nepal has also led to the emergence of anti-India sentiments. Nepal's political parties, be it the Nepali Congress Party, the Communist Party of Nepal, and other smaller political parties, they have always resisted excessive interference of India in its internal affairs. The support India had extended to the Madhesis in the Terai Belt region was always seen with suspicion by the political elites of Nepal from the hilly areas. India's deep involvement in the civil war of Nepal was also seen with suspicion. And over the last 10 to 15 years, the increasing influence of China in Nepal has also created a divide between India and Nepal. So even though India and Nepal have traditionally shared a close and cordial relationship, there have been a number of outstanding issues that have not been resolved, and one such unresolved issue is the border dispute at Kalapani and Susta. Former diplomats and strategic experts believe that both India and Nepal have committed a grave mistake by allowing the border dispute to fester for so many years, and they attribute this failure to resolve the border dispute to diplomatic lethargy. Over the last 7 decades, there have been plenty of opportunities for both the countries, especially when ties were smooth and there was a greater element of trust between the two sides, to sit at the negotiating table and peacefully resolve the border dispute through negotiations. But unfortunately, both the governments have failed to resolve the issue over the years, and hence this standing border dispute, which was largely on the back burner, has today emerged as a major source of conflict between the two countries. This dispute, which had largely been on the sidelines, has again emerged to the forefront because of a few controversial developments that have taken place over the last few months. See, after India reorganized the state of Jammu and Kashmir into 2 union territories, it published a new political map which included Kalapani and Susta as an integral part of Indian territory. So the publication of this new map, which included Kalapani and Susta as Indian territory, was criticized by the Nepali government and the Nepali parliament as an unilateral decision by India. This was the first instance where the dispute had started to re-emerge, but unfortunately both the countries failed to take the initiative to engage in diplomatic negotiations. Then just a couple of weeks ago, in May 2020, the Indian government inaugurated a road built by the Border Roads Organization that connects Dharchula to the strategic Lipu Lake Pass by passing through the disputed Kalapani region in order to facilitate the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra. So as soon as India inaugurated this new road, the dispute re-emerged and it is now threatening to affect the bilateral relationship. In response to the road inaugurated by India, the government of Nepal has responded, and yesterday it has published a new political map of Nepal which shows the entire Kalapani region, including the Lipu Lake Pass and Limpiyodhura located at the tri-junction of India, Nepal and China as a part of Nepali territory. This claim of Nepal is based on its interpretation of the Treaty of Sugauli. According to Nepal, the Treaty of Sugauli treats the westernmost tributary of the Kalapani River as the westernmost boundary of Nepal. Whereas India has a different interpretation. According to India, the Treaty of Sugauli treats the easternmost tributary of the Kalapani River as the westernmost boundary of Nepal, and hence India claims this entire region. India's interest over Kalapani is primarily driven by its strategic location. As we discussed, it is located at the tri-junction of India, China and Nepal, and it allows India to access the strategic Lipu Lake Pass which connects Tibet with Uttarakhand on the Indian side. So India makes use of this route to facilitate the Kailash Manas Sarovar Yatra, and apart from this cultural significance, India also sees a strategic significance because both India and China have a strong military presence around the Kalapani region. The Lipu Lake Pass also happens to be a border trading point between India and China, and it is also one of the designated points for meeting between border personnel of both the countries. So for India, having access to Lipu Lake Pass is of strategic significance, but the lack of diplomatic negotiations between India and Nepal has turned this into a major dispute. So over the last few months, Nepal has seen these actions of India as unilateral and provocative, and in response, the Nepali government has published a new map which claims this entire region as a part of Nepal's territory. The Nepali parliament has also introduced a resolution condemning India's decisions, and it has asked the Nepali government to take all possible diplomatic steps in order to gain control of this territory. In response to these developments coming out of Nepal, India has reacted, and the Ministry of External Affairs has labelled this as a unilateral act of Nepal that is in violation of existing bilateral understanding, and it has called upon Nepal to resolve the dispute through diplomatic talks and negotiations. The Nepali government has also said that it would be interested to resolve the dispute through talks and negotiations, but Prime Minister KP Oli has reminded India that Nepal is committed to protecting its territorial integrity at any cost. Nepal's Prime Minister has even said that Nepal understands India's concerns with regard to the Kalapani region and the Lipu Lake Pass, and he has proposed to offer the region on lease to India, provided if India recognizes Kalapani as an integral part of Nepal. As the dispute escalates, a few Indian officials, including the Indian Army Chief, have hinted at the possible role of China behind this crisis. As we discussed, China's influence in Nepal has increased substantially, especially over the last 15 years. China has been quite successful in countering India's traditional influence in Nepal, especially over the last few years, and Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli is seen as a pro-China figure by India. Because when KP Oli was the Prime Minister of Nepal in 2016, India's relations with Nepal went through a turbulent phase. Under his leadership, a number of Indian projects were cancelled, and some of these projects were handed over to Chinese companies. Earlier, under KP Oli, Nepal had clearly shown a pro-China tilt while adopting a stance which was going against Indian interests in the region. In fact, it was under KP Oli that Nepal agreed to become a part of China's Belt and Road Initiative as well. While this is definitely a genuine concern for India, it also points to India's inability to resolve the issue diplomatically. Because see, at the end of the day, India is a larger neighbor and a major power in South Asia. It is natural for smaller countries to feel threatened by such a large neighbor, and the previous experience of alleged excessive interference in Nepal's internal affairs by India adds to the problem. So by keeping these factors in mind, we can say that India has a greater responsibility to resolve the crisis diplomatically and push Nepal towards talks and negotiations. It is in India's interest to ensure that the crisis does not escalate further, which might end up creating a space for China to exert its influence in India's neighborhood. Now let's take up the next article that deals with desert locusts. See, desert locusts are a type of a grasshopper, and it is considered to be an extremely dangerous pest that has the potential to threaten global food security. These desert locusts are seen as an extremely dangerous pest because they are migratory in nature. They can migrate to faraway places in search of food, and they have the potential to travel thousands of kilometers in swarms. Each swarm will contain millions of locusts, and they are voracious feeders which feed on multiple plants and crops, and they have the ability to destroy entire agricultural fields in just a span of few hours. Along with this, the desert locusts also have a higher rate of reproduction, giving them the ability to migrate over large distances and sustain these swarms as they move from one region to another. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization has labeled the ongoing locust swarms across Africa, Middle East and South Asia as the biggest threat to global food security, and it has said that locust swarms have the same potential to affect humanity as the COVID-19 pandemic is currently doing. This ongoing locust swarm originated in January 2019 in Eastern Africa, and it was centered around Eritrea, Sudan, Kenya and Somalia. From here, the locust swarms migrated to Middle East towards Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and later they moved towards Iran and Afghanistan, and a few months ago they entered Pakistan, destroying cotton and food crops across the Sindh and Punjab province of Pakistan. Earlier this year, these locust swarms had crossed over into the Thar desert of Rajasthan and as well as to few parts of Gujarat as well. This map given out by the Food and Agriculture Organization helps us understand the current locust hotspots that are spread across East Africa, Middle East and South Asia. Experts believe these swarms have the potential to spread further into Europe and as well as into Southeast Asia and East Asia. That's the reason why these locust swarms are considered to be a threat to global food security, because they have the potential to destroy large areas of agricultural crops. According to this article, the locust swarms that had earlier crossed over from Pakistan into the Thar desert of Rajasthan have now crossed over the Thar desert as well, and they are threatening to invade 16 other districts spread across Rajasthan. The onset of summer in northern India brings favorable winds, and this has facilitated the crossover of desert locusts from the Thar desert. To deal with the threat posed by locusts, the Ministry of Agriculture has established the Locust Warning Organization, which is located at Jodhpur. The last major locust outbreak that India dealt with was in 1993, and hence, in order to prevent a recurrence, the Locust Warning Organization has stepped up its monitoring efforts by carrying out surveys in the region. It is also working with local farmers and the state government authorities to scale up the spraying of pesticides and insecticides by using tractors and drones. Now let's take up a column from page number 6, written by Mr. P.S. Raghavan, who happens to be the chairman of India's National Security Advisory Board. In this article, the writer is evaluating the reforms that were recently announced by the Finance Minister for the defense sector in order to promote self-reliance in India's defense manufacturing. See, for nearly 7 decades, the Indian Armed Forces have been heavily dependent on external suppliers for their defense needs. Most of the critical arms, ammunitions, equipment that are operated and used by the Indian Armed Forces, they are imported, and this excessive external dependency of the Indian defense sector is a cause for strategic concern and as well as a national security concern. Because when a country's armed forces and when its defense sector is so excessively dependent on external suppliers, it might create vulnerabilities, especially during a time of crisis. For example, during the Kargil war, we have seen how the United States denied access to GPS, which in turn affected India's abilities to drop precision bombs against the positions that were occupied by Pakistan. So for any country which is facing multiple national security threats, and for any country which aspires to be a major power, it is very essential to ensure that its defense manufacturing sector is self-reliant without being excessively dependent on external suppliers. India's dependency on external suppliers is so high that we not only depend on them for critical weapons and critical systems, but we also depend on them for spares, components, maintenance and servicing as well. India's external dependency for arms and weapons becomes evident when you look at India's share in the global arms imports. For the last 1 decade, India has been consistently ranked as the world's largest arms importer, and on an average, India's imports have accounted for nearly 12% of global imports. Until recently, India was repeatedly ranked as the world's largest arms importer before it was overtaken by Saudi Arabia for 2018 and 2019. Even though India's percentage in global arms imports has fallen to 9%, its external dependency still continues to remain very high, and this increases India's vulnerability, especially during a time of crisis, and hence it constitutes a strategic challenge and as well as a national security challenge. So in this context, the recent reforms that were announced by the Finance Minister for the defense sector has been welcomed by the writer because these reforms have the potential to make India self-reliant as far as defense manufacturing is concerned. The writer says that the right platform has been created by the government for promoting greater indigenization of India's defense sector by taking up the formulation of the Defense Procurement Procedure 2020 and by creating the post of Chief of Defence Staff. Currently, the government is in the process of formulating the latest defense procurement procedure, which accords a higher priority for indigenization. Recently, the government established the post of the Chief of Defence Staff in order to build greater synergy amongst the 3 armed forces, and this is expected to drive down the dependency of the armed forces on external suppliers. The Office of the Chief of Defence Staff can help in integrating the requirements and the demands of the 3 armed forces and help promote greater indigenization of defense manufacturing. So the writer says that the formulation of a new defense procurement procedure and the creation of the post of Chief of Defence Staff creates the right platform for indigenization, and upon this, the recent reforms announced by the Finance Minister is expected to give a major boost. So now let us quickly analyze the defense sector reforms that were announced by the government. The government has said that it is going to come up with a list of weapons that will have to be mandatorily procured from the domestic defense manufacturing industry. This will help India to capitalize on the strength of its domestic defense industry. India's domestic defense manufacturers, especially private defense manufacturers, they do possess the required technical capabilities and trained manpower to develop and produce a variety of defense equipment. In fact, a number of Indian private defense manufacturers, they are already acting as subcontractors for a number of foreign vendors or foreign original equipment manufacturers. The technical capabilities and the quality of the output of Indian defense manufacturers has been appreciated by foreign vendors as well. So the government is planning to capitalize on these capabilities of Indian defense manufacturers by coming out with a list of weapons that will have to be mandatorily procured through domestic sourcing. But of course, there are still a number of critical systems and critical technologies that cannot be developed and produced indigenously because Indian manufacturers still do not possess those capabilities. So such critical systems and critical weapons and critical technologies shall not be placed on this list, and the government will try to include only those weapons and equipment where Indian manufacturers already have an established presence. So this will help strike a balance between the promotion of indigenization and the fulfillment of the critical needs of the armed forces. Then to further drive up indigenization and domestic procurement, the government is planning to come out with a time-bound procurement procedure. It is planning to completely overhaul the testing procedure. It is also planning to establish a professional project management unit in order to fast-track more than 200 defense acquisition proposals that are currently pending, which have been valued at nearly $4 trillion. So if these reforms are introduced, it will definitely help domestic defense manufacturers to capture a large share of this market and help reduce India's external dependency as far as defense procurement and defense acquisition is concerned. The writer also praises the decision of the government to corporatize the ordnance factory boards. According to him, this is a long pending reform because the ordnance factory boards, which play a critical role in supplying weapon systems, spares, ammunition and auxiliaries to the armed forces, and despite being the backbone of indigenous supplies to the armed forces, their efficiency has been compromised because they are still run and operated as public sector defense units. So the corporatization of ordnance factory boards and the introduction of corporate culture will promote better managerial practices and introduce better technical skills, and this will go a long way in promoting indigenization of defense procurement. Then apart from this, the government is also looking to reduce India's external dependency, even with regard to spare parts, servicing, components, maintenance, etc. These demands can be definitely fulfilled locally, and it will help in creating numerous livelihood opportunities. Then finally, the writer appreciates the decision of the government to liberalize foreign direct investment in defense manufacturing. The government has decided to raise the limit for FDI in defense manufacturing to 74% under the automatic route. Increasing the FDI limit definitely creates more opportunities for joint ventures to be formed between foreign vendors, original equipment manufacturers, and domestic Indian manufacturers. These joint ventures will help in nurturing a strong research and development ecosystem at the local level, which in turn can help promote indigenization of defense procurement. Now let's take up the next article. The president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has said that Israel's annexation plan of West Bank violates the commitments that Israel had made under the Oslo Accords. See, just a few days ago, while discussing a practice question, we spoke about Israel's annexation plan of West Bank. These annexation plans of Israel has been criticized by a number of countries around the world, including European countries. And in this context, the president of the Palestinian Authority has said that Israel would be violating the commitments that it had made under the Oslo Accords. See, the Oslo Accords represents a peace treaty with regard to the conflict between Israel and Palestine. The first Oslo Accord was signed in 1993 and the second accord was signed in 1995. These treaties have been signed between the government of Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization with the mediation of the United States and a few other Western countries such as Norway. These accords provided for the establishment of the Palestinian Authority in order to introduce self-governance in Palestinian areas such as the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. These accords basically take a step towards the fulfillment of the two-state solution that was adopted by the United Nations in 1947 in order to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. Under the two-state solution, the UN and the global community had envisioned the Jewish state of Israel and the Muslim state of Palestine living side by side on peaceful terms. But as we discussed the other day, Israel broke the commitments made under the two-state solution and it declared unilateral independence. Over the years, through various conflicts, Israel has increased its territorial control even over Palestinian areas, and it has taken a number of coercive steps in order to prevent Palestine from becoming an independent state. This aggressive strategy of Israel, which is seen to be in violation of international law, has usually been supported by the United States. But other countries, such as African states, European powers, and even India, they have time and again criticized Israel's policies which violates international law, and they have expressed support to the fulfillment of the two-state solution. So the Oslo Accords was a step in this direction, and it provided for the establishment of the Palestinian Authority, which provided a certain degree of autonomy to the Palestinian Authority to administer and govern the Palestinian areas in West Bank and Gaza Strip. These accords were basically trying to determine the borders of Israel and Palestine, the status of West Bank, Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, and the status of Jewish settlements that have come up inside West Bank. In order to settle the status of these settlements that are located inside West Bank, the Oslo Accords proposed to divide West Bank into three areas. We have Area A, Area B, and Area C. Area A refers to Palestinian territories and it has been placed under the direct control of the Palestinian Authority. Whereas Area B is jointly administered by the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel. Whereas Area C refers to the Jewish settlements located inside West Bank and it is entirely controlled and administered by the government of Israel. But under the Oslo Accords, the status of the Jordan Valley and other illegal Jewish settlements was yet to be determined. And now, in violation of these commitments, Israel has come up with an annexation plan to annex the Jordan Valley and other illegal Jewish settlements that are present inside West Bank. This proposed annexation plan of Israel has been supported by the Trump administration, but it has been criticized by other European powers. Because if Israel goes ahead with these annexation plans, it violates the commitments that Israel had made under the Oslo Accords. So the president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, has raised the same concerns, and he has said that Israel would be violating the commitments made under the Oslo Accord. He has also said that since Israel is so blatantly violating the commitments, even the Palestinian Authority is no longer bound by these commitments, and it has threatened to quit all the previous agreements that the Palestinian Authority has signed with Israel and the United States. Now let's take up an article from page number 14, which helps us understand the covert cyber warfare that goes on between two arch rivals, that is Israel and Iran. This article also helps us understand the potential of cyber attacks and cyber warfare to disrupt a country's critical infrastructure. First, let us begin by talking about what is critical infrastructure. See, critical infrastructure refers to those sectors which form the backbone of a country's economy and a country's national security. This includes sectors such as banking and finance. It also includes the power and energy sector comprising of nuclear power plants, thermal power plants, hydroelectric power plants, etc. It also includes water supply systems, traffic management, airports, seaports, critical government organizations and institutions such as the Prime Minister's Office, the Ministry of Defense, and as well as key research institutions. So these sectors, which constitute the backbone of a country's economy and national security, they are referred to as a country's critical infrastructure. And the IT systems, that is the information technology systems, that are controlling, operating and running these critical sectors is referred to as critical information infrastructure of a country. And a well-designed cyber attack has the potential to bring down these IT systems. It means that it is possible to attack a country's critical information infrastructure through cyber attacks and through cyber warfare in order to cause a real-world impact wherein a country's critical infrastructure can be crippled. So considering the potential of cyber attacks in waging a covert proxy war against a target country, most governments around the world, they have built up both offensive and defensive capabilities in cyber warfare. Amongst these countries, Israel and Iran have a long history of engaging in a covert proxy war against each other through cyber attacks. Recently, there was an incident wherein Iran had reportedly unleashed a cyber attack in order to target the water supply systems of Israel. According to reports from Western intelligence officials, this attack carried out by Iran was partially successful, and it pushed Israel to retaliate against these attacks originating from Iran. So in order to send out a strong message to Iran and impose a cost on Iran for carrying out such cyber attacks, Israel decided to disrupt the functioning of the Shahid Raji port, which is located at the Strait of Hormuz, which happens to be a strategic choke point through which most of the world's oil supplies pass through. Through a cyber attack, Israel tried to disrupt the functioning of this strategic port in order to create traffic jams at the narrow Strait of Hormuz and disrupt the supply and transportation of oil. So this incident of cyber warfare involving Israel and Iran highlights the threat posed by cyber attacks to a country's critical infrastructure, particularly to a country's critical information infrastructure. India on its part has taken a few steps in order to protect its critical information infrastructure. Recently, India has established the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center under Section 70A of the Information Technology Act of 2000. This institution has been set up as per the recommendations that were made under the National Cybersecurity Policy of 2013. This institution functions under the NTRO, or the National Technical Research Organization, which is the technical intelligence wing of the research and analysis wing. The primary mandate of India's National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center is to defend all forms of cyber attacks against India's critical infrastructure. Now let's take up the practice questions. Which of the following statements are correct? The Kudankulam nuclear power plant is the result of an intergovernmental agreement between India and France. It is said to be the largest nuclear power station in India and is operated by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect because the Kudankulam nuclear power plant is the result of an intergovernmental agreement between India and Russia, not between India and France. So this makes the first statement incorrect, so option B is the right answer. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 5, a team of Russian nuclear scientists are being brought to the Kudankulam nuclear power plant, which is under construction, in order to address a few mechanical problems that have developed in these generators. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The May 4th movement of 1919 was an anti-imperialist, cultural, socio-political movement that took place in China. The movement grew out of student protests, and they protested against the Chinese government's weak response to the Treaty of Versailles. The term May 4th movement is often used in China to refer to the period between 1915 to 1921, more often called the New Culture Movement. All the three statements are correct. Option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a column on page number 6 written by India's former National Security Advisor M.K. Narayanan, in which he says that China is better prepared for a post-COVID-19 world. In this column, he makes a reference to China's May 4th movement. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Khilafat movement was essentially a movement to express the support of Indian Muslims for the Caliph of Turkey against the Allied powers, particularly Britain. It was a protest against the sanctions placed on the Caliph and the Ottoman Empire after the First World War by the Treaty of Sèvres. It was led by leaders such as Shaukat Ali, Muhammad Ali Johar, Hakim Ajmal Khan and Abul Kalam Azad. Proponents of the Khilafat see it as the spark that led to the non-cooperation movement in India and a major milestone in improving Hindu-Muslim relations. All the four statements are correct, hence option D is the right answer. This question has been asked because the 100 years ago article from page number 7 makes a reference to the Khilafat agitation. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which committee had recommended that farmers must get 150% of their cost of production as MSP? The correct answer is option C, the Swaminathan Commission, or also known as the National Commission on Farmers. Now let's take up the next practice question. The Millennium Challenge Corporation is a bilateral foreign aid agency established by which country? The correct answer is option D, United States. See, recently we spoke about a foreign aid agency of the United States known as USAID, which is under the US government. Similarly, the US Congress has established another foreign aid agency known as the Millennium Challenge Corporation. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 14, the United States is looking to provide additional foreign aid of $130 million to Nepal through the Millennium Challenge Corporation in order to pull Nepal away from China's Belt and Road Initiative. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2016 prelims paper. Consider the following statements. The minimum age prescribed for any person to be a member of Panchayat is 25 years. This statement is incorrect. The minimum age for entering Panchayat is 21 years, not 25. The second statement says that a Panchayat reconstituted after premature dissolution continues only for the remainder period. This is a correct statement. So option B is the right answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, the border dispute between India and Nepal is a result of colonial blunders and diplomatic lethargy. Examine the statement along with the implications of the border dispute on India's ties with Nepal. The second question, desert locusts pose a grave threat to global food security. Discuss in detail. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.